Hello, 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 everyone. Good morning and welcome to another episode of the Sunday New York Times Read Along. My name is Sri Srinivasan, and I'm the Marshall Loeb Visiting Professor of Digital Innovation at Stony Brook School of Communication and Journalism and the co-founder of Digimentors, a digital and virtual events consultancy. So grateful to have you all with us on the Sunday New York Times Read Along, which we've been doing now for more than 5 years. We have folks around the world watching us, and we'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Tell us how your Sunday is going, what you're thinking about the news. Have you been vaccinated? We'd love to hear all of that. Today, we have a very special episode. Our guest is Michael Moss. Follow him at Michael Moss C, author of Hooked, Food, Free Will, and How the Food Giants Exploit Our Addictions. He's a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist, formerly with the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. We'll get started in a minute. Please tag a friend. Please share this. They can watch live or watch later. We'd love to have your friends join us. We're live on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and on LinkedIn. So please hit share and tell your friends. I want to start by thanking our incredible team that puts together the read along. Our executive producer and occasional guest host is Neil Parekh, and our production team, Paula Kiger at Big Green Pen, Steve Taylor at Steve DeReeve, Carla Baranauckas at Kabara, and Julia Weeks at Julia L. Weeks. Please connect and follow with them on their various social media channels. What makes the show different from a lot of things you see, including Zoom calls, is this production team. Neil's away today. Otherwise, you would have seen him right at the beginning, right here. And we're all part of the Digimentors team. We produce, as you can see on the screen, we produce social and digital consulting. We do conferences, summits, webinars, talk shows, and training and workshops. If you would like to talk to us about any of these opportunities, please connect. We'd also like to thank our sponsor, MuckRack. MuckRack does incredible work connecting us with our journalists as well as PR professionals and using the latest technology and ways of understanding what's going on in the media world. So please check out muckrack.com and let us know if you'd like to be a sponsor of our show. You can email me, as you can see right on the screen. And we want to tell you about our big event coming up on May 21 and 22. That's a Friday night and Saturday Eastern Time, is Social Media Weekend, which will be live and recorded and available. And tickets are on sale now. This is a social media and digital media conference with lots of tips, workshops, and headliners and keynotes. smwknd.com. Anyone interested in the digital world should definitely tune in. Hi, everyone. I'm Sri. Thank you so much for being here. We'll be joined by Michael in just a minute. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's see who's here. We have folks watching from around the world. Here's Dr. Sujana is here, Sujana Chandrasekhar. She is the host of a show that we produce at 11 a.m. Eastern. She's on call along with her colleague, Dr. Marina Korean. Today, they have an unusual topic, neurosurgery and Netflix. They have two stars of the Netflix show Lenox Hill joining them, two very senior doctors who are going to be talking about neurosurgery. That's at 11 a.m. Eastern time. So please do join us for that. Let's see who else is watching. Jonathan Borstein is watching from the East Village. Hi, Jonathan. Tim Sohn is watching from Northeast Pennsylvania. And Patricia Freudenberg is here viewing from New York. Always good to have you. And we have Deborah Kerr says hello from sunny Fort Lauderdale. Doug Levy is up early out in California. Good morning from Marin County in the SF Bay Area, where 75% of adults have got a COVID shot already. Miriam Berkeley is watching from Hell's Kitchen in New York. Looking forward to this program. And Michael Moss. Emily Silverman's watching from Philadelphia. And Sudha Parekh is watching from Hastings-on-Hudson. That's Neil's mom. Hi, Auntie. Great to have you here. And let's see, Nicole's watching from New Delhi, India. That's the front page story. Lead photograph is about India. Terrible situation there. And we want to talk about what's happening in India, of course. Nick Hati Singh is watching from New York. Diane Stefani is watching from Rainy Margate. Already signed up for Social Media Weekend, smwknd.com. And Naomi is here watching from the Upper West Side. So what we'd like to do is to very quickly show you a little bit of what's in the paper today, and then we will bring on Michael. So this is the array of the New York Times that we like to show. And as you can see, we have the book review, and we'll be talking to our New York Times bestselling author friend in just a minute. And the New York Times Magazine has Seth Rogen on the cover. The Sunday Business is, that's Mackenzie Scott, former wife of Jeff Bezos. And because she doesn't have a very sophisticated website or foundation, people are pretending to be her and scamming folks, which is very sad, of course. Sunday Review cover is, can we learn to love germs again? I presume the answer will be very complicated. The New York Times Kids section is comes out once a month, and here it is today. And we love the note here, editor's note, this section should not be read by grown-ups. And we also have the Sunday Styles cover is about Jake Paul, a digital villain, as some of you may know. And we are going to look at the front page and talk about it. But first, let me bring on to the screen here Michael Moss, our guest. And let's again tell you a little bit about him. He's the author of Hooked, Food, Free Will, and How the Food Giants Exploit Our Addictions. And he is a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist, formerly with the Wall Street Journal and with the New York Times. And we are just so delighted to have him here with us. So please say hello, everyone, to Michael Moss. Hi, Michael.
Hey, it's so great to be with you this morning.
Thank you so much for your time. Are you a Sunday morning person?
Well, first I wanted to thank you for your time because, for those of you out there who aren't reporters, right? I mean, Sunday is an incredibly special day for reporters when they have a story in the newspaper, because you've been working all week or all month or even longer on your piece and perfecting it with help from your editor. And Friday night you may be in the newsroom or working remotely with your editors to the final polishing touches, and then maybe Saturday morning you're doing that final proof of the story to make sure there aren't any mistakes in it. And then Saturday afternoon it's like the calm before the storm. And then Sunday morning you wake up, because Sunday typically would have the biggest readership. You're kind of praying a little bit for bad weather, so people are home paying attention to the newspaper. And you've put kind of all your effort into making, your reporting and your work as big and powerful and influential as it can, just kind of hoping people are waking up and grabbing the paper and turning to their spouse and saying, honey, you gotta read this, right? Which is just like magic to the ears of reporters. So yeah, Sunday is incredible for news reporters.
Thank you. Paula is already giving us a link to your website at mossbooks.us. So folks should definitely check that out. Ellen's watching from the Upper East Side. And Edmund says, thanks for your ongoing commitment week after week to do this show. We are pleased to do it. Jean's watching from Tallahassee, Florida, and Lambert is watching from Maryland. And has his own show after watching Social Media Weekend last year. Linda's watching from a rainy Long Island. And of course, we got the rain that you were just describing to us. So, what is your Sunday like after this? What are you going to be doing?
I'm working on an op-ed piece for another newspaper I won't mention right now. So I have that to do. I have another show about Hooked later on this afternoon. My 17-year-old has taken SAT practice test, so I'll be looking over his shoulder later today. The Mets are playing yet again at 1 o'clock, so I will be cheering on for them. And then we'll have a wonderful Sunday dinner at some point.
And how are the Mets doing this year? This is supposed to be a breakthrough year, right?
It's really tough. I mean, on one hand, they have the very best pitcher in the league, soon to be hopefully of all time, doing an incredible job, Jacob deGrom. In fact, I was chuckling a little at your company's name because the nickname for him is now the deGrominator. He pitched on his last time out was like, not only did he pitch a full game, allowing 2 tiny little hits, but he got the first hit of the game, and then he got a second hit of the game, at the plate batting. So it's like the crowd was cheering MVP. And then, the rest of the team is still kind of deciding what they're going to be this year. Are they going to be a 500 team, or are they going to be a really great team that I think that they can be? So it's a little dicey moment right now for Mets fans.
I hear you and understand. Dr. Chandrasekhar was at the Mets game on Friday and got to watch. Linda has already put Hooked in her Amazon cart. So folks, everyone should do that as well, or your favorite independent bookstore. Rose Horowitz, who helps produce She's on Call, just read the review on Hooked. And Laura Silverman's joining us from Philadelphia. And we have a lovely comment here. Thanks for the incredible information. It's great to have everybody here. We're going to be talking about Michael's book, which he's going to hold up just now so we can show it to everybody.
Absolutely, without turning
there you
around
go.
too much, but
So
there we go.
Hooked, Food, Free Will, and How the Food Giants Exploit Our Addiction. So we will also get a demo in a little bit about it. You're the best-selling author of Salt, Sugar, Fat, which is a book many people know. Can you give us the synopsis of the new book?
So the new book picks up on salt, sugar, fat almost with a confession, because as much as I've kind of harped on those 3 additives in processed food as having caused so much trouble for us, I kind of realize that the things that aren't on the labels of these products in the grocery store are tapping our deepest biology to get us to want more and more of them in a way that almost makes us unwitting conspirators with this trillion-dollar processed food industry. And so Hooked is looking at the question of whether we should look at these products as being addictive, like cigarettes, alcohol, and drugs. And if so, what lessons can we draw from the world of other addictions to help us regain control of our eating habits?
So what are a couple of quick takeaways that people should know?
Well, one is I completely flipped around on the issue, and absolutely not only are some of these products as addictive, in some ways they're more addictive than cigarettes and alcohol and even drugs. I mean, we by nature, and I spent a chapter in the book kind of looking at our evolutionary biology and spending time with biologists, and a little bit of pushback from them, which is that it's not so much that food is addictive, is that we by nature are drawn to food. And these companies have changed the nature of our food so dramatically that our biology hasn't had a chance to catch up in the last 50 years. And so this is an incredible mismatch. So they go after our natural inclination to love food that's inexpensive and do things that we'll talk about to sort of hit that part of our brain that gets overjoyed by a box of toaster pastries costing 10 cents, less than it did last week. they know that we love variety, and so they'll do things to sort of maximize the allure of the variety aspects of these ultra-processed food products. And maybe most importantly, they know that we by nature are drawn to calories and get excited by calories in food almost as much as salt, sugar, fat. And so what do? They maximize, the amount of nutrient empty calories in their products, knowing that we'll get excited about that and start having cravings for their products and lose control of our eating habits.
Yeah, that is certainly sounds like a lot of folks I know, including me. Stefan says, I just had Trader Joe's raspberry Pop-Tarts and French vanilla coffee, Michael. So am I hooked?
Well, only if you've had them and now suddenly you're thinking about them and wanting more and more of them, right?
Yeah, that's part of the things that make it hard. Now, you're going to be our first guest who's going to use his kitchen countertop in a demo later. So tell us why people should tune in or invite their friends. What are we going to learn in a few minutes?
So one of the great things about writing about food is that, you can play with it and demonstrate. It's like real, it's right there. You can taste it and smell it and sort of show what it does to you. So I'm going to walk around behind the counter and give you sort of a hands-on demo of why these products we all love too much are trouble for us.
Yeah, that's one of the things that people should stay tuned for. We're, of course, going to talk about the paper and so much more. We have an important question from Patricia. Is Hooked on Audible?
It is, absolutely. The narrator is Scott Brick, one of the masters in the business. He narrated Salt, Sugar, Fat. He does all the big mystery, sci-fi thriller books out there too, which was great for me because I wrote Hooked kind of, hoping that people would read this like a detective story, not a nutritional screed on the industry, but kind of going inside this cartel, if you will, of multinational corporations as they're doing everything to get us to want their products. And Scott does a fabulous job, sort of, bringing the drama and the trouble and the fear and the angst of that to life in his reading of the book.
I've not written a book, so I don't know how this goes, but is there a moment where an author is told you're not going to be narrating the book yourself and you wish you were? How does that work?
Well, not me, because Scott, as I said, is just so masterful at that. I think there's a moment as an author when you're writing and you're thinking about kind of what the reader is sort of thinking and doing, and you want those words to kind of come alive on the pages and in their heads, but it's really not until a master like Scott Brick comes along and reads, and that you've really sort of managed to sort of build those incredibly important narrative arcs to the chapters and to the book overall.
Sure, that makes sense. Rose says, sounds like a fascinating must-read book, and Patricia has already downloading now on Audible, so you're making a sale there. And here's Ron Thomas watching from Dubai, former guest on the show, just ordered. And Linda is saying fruits and vegetables from grocery stores here have no flavor. I try to find local whenever possible, but not always easy to find, and it's expensive. And Rose is posting what you said, that these products are more addictive than nicotine. They hit that part of our brain where we start our cravings and want more and more of them. And Sujana says, fruit and vegetables taste so wonderful in India and are so bland here. Why? And does that make us in the US go to unhealthy foods?
One of the tragedies here in terms of our eating habits is how so much of the agriculture system is focused on making the ingredients for ultra-processed foods cheaper and cheaper and yummier and irresistible, and very little relative energy, research and development money goes into helping farmers grow those things we all should be eating more of, Brussels sprouts and broccoli rabe. And so that's why you get this financial economic inequity in the grocery store, walking in, having, full intentions of doing right by your health, by your family health, and a basket of blueberries, especially off season, is going to cost as much as a 2-pound, 3-cheese, 4-meat frozen pizza that's going to feed the whole family. And so what are you going to do?
And that's the dilemma, right? And however, I'm sure that you get into this at some point, but how have other countries, other Western countries dealt with this?
So, the first answer is they're having to deal with this because much like the tobacco industry, which came under fire in this country in the 90s, and then as a result of that, as a strategy began moving, their marketing operations to other countries, knowing that they could get more, it was easier to get people smoking in other countries than it was in the United States. These big food companies have done the same as more and more people care about what they're putting in their bodies. The biggest processed food companies have moved to other countries. And just as a tiny illustration of that, salt, sugar, fat is now in 20 languages translated. And Hooked is starting to get translated too. And I've given talks all around the world, including Saudi Arabia, where the obesity rate, type 2 diabetes rate has been soaring as people there have begun, getting hammered by the consequences of a diet that's too heavily reliant and dependent on these ultra-processed foods.
Thank you for telling us that. We have comments here. MuckRack says, is talking about how nature designs them to look attractive and for ready consumption. And then you put in toxic ink and plastics and packaging and things like that. And Nick says, I agree. It seems that so much, including cheeses and meats, taste better outside the US.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Part of that is also kind of memory too, and we can talk a little bit about that because one of the ways that these food products are more powerful than other addictive substances is that we begin forming memories for food at an incredibly early age, possibly even when we're still in the womb, and we tend to associate those memories with good times, other kind of emotional aspects. And so that's why, for example, the soda companies realize if they can put a soda in the hands of a kid when they're at the ballpark with their parents, that soda will forevermore get associated with that joyous moment. So when that kid grows up and wants a little joy in their life, they're going to think of that soda. That's how powerful memory is. And so I think some of these associations we have with fruits and vegetables and foods tasting better from other countries may be related to our childhood experience with those things from those days.
Thank you, Michael. Mark says he's watching from Durham, North Carolina. I think we got even more hooked on bad food during the COVID pandemic because it's so much easier to order, I guess, and people also not able to go out as much. Miriam says, this morning I was looking at unsweetened almond milk and only one brand had no added sugar or salt, and that brand was more than twice the price of others.
Yeah, that's so interesting. The last story I did for the New York Times was about our pandemic eating and a real surprise that I discovered there, and we can kind of talk about that. And I hear you on the sugar. By some estimates, 2/3 of the products in the grocery store now have added sugar in them. So if you're somebody who has trouble sort of controlling their response to sort of sugar, shopping, for groceries is like an alcoholic walking to a bar looking for a plain bottle of water. It can be really treacherous and requires a lot of attention to what you're picking up and putting in your cart.
You mentioned Saudi Arabia, and here's Ron who says, having lived in Saudi, I was struck by the end caps in grocery stores were filled with American processed foods, from cookies to chips. They have taken over. And Linda says, I remember the flavor and texture of small pears from my grandmother's backyard trees when I was young. And Mark says that Durham Durham to Go is an organization that's trying to get us away from plastic packaging. And Eve says, good morning. And there's so much to talk about here. So thank you, everybody. That's Michael Moss, the author of Hooked, and he's with us for the next hour, and we're going to talk about his book and so much more. Here is Moss Appeal, another good show, Sri. No relation to Michael, but a fan of his point of view, echoes what the McLarens are saying in Maximize Your Metabolism with Insulin Processed Food Creating a Second Pandemic. And so thank you, everyone, for being here. Let's talk a little bit about the paper and the news. And Michael, jump in at any point if you have a thought about what's happening, anything I read out here. And we'll just start with the front page and the headlines here and the main story. As COVID ravages India, true toll is undercounted. Cremations never end. Experts say total deaths far exceed the nearly 200,000 reported. And here you're seeing cremating the remains of people who died from COVID-19 in East Delhi on Friday. India now accounts for almost half of all new coronavirus cases reported around the world. And it's such a tragic story. My family is in India, as many of you know, and we are talking to them every day to see what the situation is. Fortunately, our parents are vaccinated, but there's still something like 1.5% of the country has been vaccinated. And there's a big shortage of oxygen and other essentials. They're running out of hospital beds, which is really sad because India had done relatively well during the pandemic. Michael, you might remember some of that coverage of how India was kind of a model in some ways, and now it's in this awful situation.
And that photo, I can't see who the photographer is.
Yeah, Atul Lok for the New York Times.
Wow. I mean, that photo is just so dark and so foreboding. And at first you kind of maybe don't immediately sort of tell what's going on. And then, you know, within seconds you do, and it's just gripping. And I understand why the editors decided to play it out so big above the fold on the front page. It's just staggering.
And there's still a lot America can do to help, including releasing some of the excess supply of vaccines that we have, and also releasing some of the restrictions around intellectual property around vaccines. And India, which is manufacturing vaccines for other countries, needs all the help it can get. And so we'll keep a close eye on this. Nicole is checking in from India and says vaccines have not been available for people under the age of 45. These new strains are hitting younger people harder, which is the majority population in India. Plus the first shot isn't effective enough, but people get more confident. And that's certainly a problem. Patricia says, my deepest condolences to India. And Nicole says, watch out, world. India was pretty good a few weeks ago. This happened dramatically. Stay vigilant. A good lesson from there. And Patricia says, harsh reality with the reporting of India, but necessary to face the hard facts of global news. And let's see what else is on the front page. Volatile and vengeful, the Rudin approach to show business. And this is about Scott Rudin, who's a big-time Hollywood and Broadway producer. He made things like The Social Network, No Country for Old Men, and the Broadway show To Kill a Mockingbird. He's accused of, by over decades, by people he worked for. He throws things at them. He has anger management issues and lots of problems. So this is finally catching up with him. Climate goals carry big risk or a big payoff. And I know, Michael, that your work about food ties in very closely to climate change.
Yeah, it's an aspect of food that I haven't paid a lot of attention to. Other people have, but it kind of gets to this question too of kind of what we value in food and whether we should continue allowing big food to tell us what we value in food, or whether we can sort of start deciding for ourselves. And, you know, and those values are going to be things like, how are the farm workers treated, and how are the farmers treated, and how do those crops and products sort of affect climate change and the environment, and on and on and on. So I love kind of all the people out there who are working both as journalists but also as activists, sort of, you know, looking at one or various aspects of why food is so important to us and the globe in many different ways.
What else is on the front page? Texas GOP targets access for city voters. And we've been watching all across the South what they've been doing in many states, cutting back access to voting. Despite losses, CEOs prosper amid pandemic. And the stories here about companies that, including, by the way, Norwegian Cruise Line that barely survived. Their CEO got $36.4 million. And these kind of pay rates and things, I presume, are also an issue at the big food companies.
Kind of, but in a kind of a different way. I mean, what really surprised me about the biggest companies I've kind of written about is sort of how many of their own people, top officials, middle officials, don't eat their own products, because there's a bit of sort of a class divide. Either they don't have to because their spouse doesn't have to work outside of the home and can spend lots of time cooking from scratch, or they don't because they're wary about the health impacts, or more sort of the craving impact of these products. And so that divide between the people making these products and the people eating their products, I found to be incredibly surprising and compelling.
Thank you. We're looking here at the front page of the New York Times. Key to Chauvin verdict was humanizing Floyd. And this is talking about, hopefully this will change how victims of police violence are portrayed. And then more mummies, fewer tourists. And this is in Egypt, was anticipating a banner tourism season until COVID-19. Have you been to Egypt?
I have not. I've traveled through the Middle East for the reporting that I was doing before writing about the food industry. But Egypt remains on my list to go to.
Yeah. So we'll be going through the paper here, and I want to make sure that everyone who's watching gets a chance to share this with their friends and family. Please hit share, retweet, etc. And your friends can watch live or watch later. And Michael, I hope you've had a chance to share this on your social channels. If you've not, I'd love for you to take a minute to just hit share if you could. Yes. On Twitter and Facebook. Let's see, 55-story building opens on a flash. This is about the Woolworth building in 1913. And then the tallest building and the second tallest structure after the Eiffel Tower opened in Manhattan. And it was a big deal when it opened back then. And remains an iconic site in the skyline. In 1966, the building was named a historical National Historic Landmark.
I love the Woolworth building. The lobby is just spectacular.
Here to help. Doctor's visits you need at every age. This is kind of helpful. And the New York Times has, over the years, as you know, is doing more and more service journalism in addition to everything else it does. And here is what are the things you need. So if people don't have access to the digital version, they may want to take a screenshot of this and then blow that up and read it later. So it tells you what are the things you need to do. By the way, are you vaccinated yet?
I am. I'm fully vaccinated, and as a result, I've been booking all kinds of appointments with doctors for the screening, including dentists, for the screening that, just the precautionary visits that most of us weren't doing during the pandemic. And it's a terrific relief to be able to sort of catch up with that aspect, given the incredible healthcare that we have access to, or at least many of us have access to. I can't thank doctors enough for the work that they've continued to do through the pandemic, but also now to sort of help us catch up with our overall health beyond COVID.
Thank you. Macron says that the world should worry about a third wave, and countries like Japan, Canada, and continents like Africa still don't have enough vaccines. Mary Jane's watching from Manhasset. And Nicole says, isn't COVID also encouraging more home cooking? Maybe it depends where you live and what can be delivered easily and safely. Michael?
Well, we could talk about that. So the story I did for the New York Times last summer, I guess, kind of looked at that question. At first, I think we thought that at least, with the pandemic and quarantining, we could get away from the vending machine, arguably one of the more treacherous corners of the processed food industry, by not having to sort of, go outside for work where there are vending machines. But Many of us, it turns out, turned our kitchen cupboards into vending machines, because what happened is that when we went shopping, under the stress and the strain of the pandemic, a good number of us began buying junky stuff that we hadn't had since kids. The food companies are rather elated by it. They saw their sales soar. They're continuing to soar. And again, that kind of speaks to the power of memory, because we've been bringing those things home and then finding them hard to resist in our houses. So that, and not only that, but the food companies then began in their marketing strategies doing things to exploit, if you will, our fear of the pandemic. And I remember the Twitter advertisements for Doritos, where you had 2 bags and 2 people, being told to distance themselves safely 6 feet by putting 6-foot-long bags of Doritos before themselves. So the food industry sort of has this cunning ability to sort of figure out what emotional buttons to push in us in order to have us get us to like their products and again want more and more of them.
Thank you, Michael. We're just looking at stories about LGBTQ people fleeing a more hateful Poland. And here's more about Egypt. Terrorism fears feed the rise of France's extreme right. Police officers killing sharpens the social battle. And here's an ad from the food industry. Let us know if you have any thoughts on this. Agriculture can be part of the climate solution. Bacon, chicken wings, and steak with net zero emissions. It's possible. Is it possible?
I don't know. I haven't looked at that. I think that's one of the big kind of factors out there that people are paying attention to now, is sort of, what role can this food industry play going forward that's going to meaningfully going to change things for the better.
And here, this was big news yesterday. Biden recognizes the Ottoman-era massacre of Armenians as genocide, and Turkey is really upset about this. This is something they fought for many, many decades, and this is really important to the Armenian people. And a sad story about an Indonesian submarine with 53 people on board disappeared. Arms dealer in the crosshairs of Russia's elite assassination squad. This is one of the things exists in Russia, and very sad to know the impact of that. And here's a Van Gogh exhibition. So this is one of the things that is interesting, that over the last few years there have been kind of commercial, directly commercial, more obviously commercial art exhibitions in addition to what you find at museums. And this is the immersive Van Gogh. And earlier we saw an ad from Facebook asking for more regulations. And here's journalism by New York Times, technology by Facebook, inspired by cinema, directed by you, powered by AR. So this is some new technology that the New York Times and Facebook are working at. Living with the specter of gun violence, one school, 5 dead students. Very sad. This is in Knoxville, Tennessee. As I'm scrolling through this, tell me about your relationship with print, and what does it feel like to see the paper laid out like this?
Being older, I just turned 65, which is why I was able to get vaccinated fairly early on. My memory is for print. As a elementary school kid, I grew up partly in Fresno, California, and having the bee arrive at our house and to be able to sort of leaf through it. I think probably for that reason, I'll always be more attracted to the print paper. But I have to say, I spend more time reading the Times and other papers online, even on my phone, than I do in print these days.
Sure. You've heard the saying, the meeting should have been an email, right? And then, so now they say it could have been a Snagit. This is a way to capture screenshots and things like that. And so that's,
oh my gosh, meetings. Well, people may be shocked, but even in the news business, there are meetings and meetings and meetings, especially those poor editors all day long. I feel for them.
And here's more about Scott Rudin. Look at the treatment here. And it really tells you they went for Oscar Sunday to talk about this story because he's obviously had lots of Oscar success. Have you seen any of the Oscar movies? I don't think I've seen any of the top, the ones for Best Picture.
I saw Nomadland. I love that incredibly. And helping with the title, the immigrant family said, was it Arkansas, somewhere in the South?
Yeah, Nomari.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Both of those films I thought were just fantastic. And I'm rooting for them both.
Let's see. For French in space, plain tang won't do. We know that American astronauts get that, but apparently a balsamic vinegar reduction added to a low temperature cooked salmon was needed for these for a French astronaut.
Hey, why not? I mean, I hear you. I'm so glad for them.
Yeah, look, you're getting full gourmet meals in space. And,
you know, I mean, have you tasted tang lately?
Yeah, and then here is accompanying him on the SpaceX flight was special meals of lobster, cod, and potato cakes with wild mushrooms.
Ooh.
They really took it very seriously. And his approval rating is down, but Cuomo still has path to fourth term. Can you believe that?
That's unbelievable.
Well, it says path. Doesn't mean it'll happen, but still.
Right.
Yeah. Post-Trump ethics measures idle on back burner as voting battles rage. And I hope those, the good guys win some of the voting battles. There was an election last night for special election in Louisiana. And then DMX, the rapper, was being remembered. And fans accused Disney of taking a woke scalpel to its park. The backlash is blunt. Some father complained about how they're changing things at Disney. And let's talk a little bit about obits. I'm a fan of obits, and I read them closely and carefully. And there's a great new app called Miss You Graham that you can check out if you're interested in saying goodbye and doing online tributes. But tell me about your relationship with obits.
Well, I was at the paper when the paper really decided to sort of turn obituaries into an art form and a prideful part of the newspaper, and assigned, terrific journalists to spend lots of time, turning what might be ordinary, not so interesting obituaries into sort of fantastic reads, and really doing justice to these people and their lives, and looking for people from all walks of lives too. So I'm so thankful that the paper made that move some years ago.
And by the way, Neil Genslinger has been a guest on the show twice, and he has an obit here of Al Young, author and poet with a musical bent, and then Alan Schoner, curator whose Harlem exhibit drew outrage, dies at 95. This was a 1969 landmark show called Harlem on My Mind, and it had no Black artists featured in it. It had a lot of Harlem, but not actual Black artists. And it was widely criticized. There was some reassessment in later years, but just fascinating obit. And we already talked about your interest in the Mets. Any other sports stories you follow?
I'm a bit of an adventure sports guy myself. So when they start running stories about rock climbers or mountain climbers or what have you, I do pay attention to those.
By the way, Tiffany used to have a page 3 ad for more than 100 years, starting in 1917. But we noticed in the last few months they've stopped that ad, but they've run an ad on the back here, full page ad that talks about sustainability. And, that's with all the interest in blood diamonds. And,
traceability. Yeah, I see that. That's great.
And so you go to tiffany.com/sustainability to learn more. Let's look at one more section, and then we'll do our demo with Michael Moss. You get to pick where we go next.
Well, let's go to arts and leisure.
All right. Yeah. So, and now a pirouette to parenthood. Many professional dancers have taken advantage of their time away from the stage in the pandemic to try out a new role. So I guess as long as you were still able to bring in some income, this was a welcome opportunity.
It's a great photo too.
Yeah. Bradley Whitford is down with dog parks. Post-Trump America sounds like this. And so lots of podcasts. And do you have any podcast recommendations you want to pass along? My wife, who is about to take our dog out, is a very serious podcast listener. And so she'd appreciate some recommendations.
I have done 65 interviews for Hooked since the book came out in early March. Many of them being podcasts that I'd never heard of. And I've posted a good number of those interviews on my website. People can look. But I've just been astounded by how much great journalism and or podcasting there is out there that like I say, I hadn't been paying attention to. So I hesitate to sort of even name one or two because there's so many really, really good ones. And people are really learning how, in this kind of virtual moment, how to sort of communicate and connect to people virtually through podcasts. I think it's just fantastic.
That's great. Here we're looking at a pregnant pause in pandemic time. And with the break in performing, many dancers have used their time off stage for motherhood. And it's sad that they couldn't do it otherwise. And let's look at some of the comments coming in here. Ron Thomas says, I scan on my phone, but my reading is on my iPad. Once back in New York City, I'm back to the paper. Something about turning pages that he likes. And we've got a couple of shout outs for Minari. And Nicole says, would be fun to see a French version of The Martian. The guy would have spent more time trying to cultivate seasonings for those potatoes. For those of you who haven't seen the film, this is about the American astronaut, Matt Damon, stuck in Mars. And all he wants to do is grow potatoes, and he eats that.
But I think he was desperate for seasoning, as I recall. The little bit of salt or pepper that he had was like a godsend.
And Dr. Lippy Roy is watching from Manhattan. Welcome. And Wayne Kamadoy, who is one of the designers at the New York Times, says, in Minari, the mention of Mountain Dew as mountain water is a food memory for the author.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Linda says, the French must have better relationship with food than we do, no matter where they are. And lots of other great comments coming in is here. Mm-hmm. All right, let's take a look at Dance Pop for British Star. Many tears go by. And this is Marianne Faithfull's battle with the coronavirus is just one of her several brushes with death. I didn't know that. And here, this is Marianne Faithfull then and Marianne now.
Nice.
And Black Heroes Reimagine the Fight for Equality is the headline we see here. And it's by Veronica Chambers, who was also a guest on this show. And
terrific.
It was great to have her with us. So much to read. When co-stars are up for the same Oscar. I've never quite understood the Best Supporting Actor or an Actress category. And so I guess this will explain some of that at least. Digging into Academy Award data sheds some light on whom the odds favor.
Nice.
All right. Okay, so now, folks, we are talking to Michael Moss, and Michael is the author. He's going to hold up his book. It's called Hooked, and
so nice.
It's got a very clear description: food, free will, and how the food giants exploit our addictions. And so, my first question is: what were the alternate titles for that book?
So that is interesting because Hooked was kind of with us all along. And I have a brilliant editor at Random House, Andy Ward, who, like my editor at the New York Times, has a real sixth sense for these things. And I should go back to Salt, Sugar, Fat. He reached out to me when I was at the paper and wanted me to write a book about food. And we had a business meeting over some Thai food on the Upper West Side, as I recall. And I was kind of telling him about some new reporting because I started out writing about food, looking at contamination, salmonella in peanuts, E. coli in hamburger. And at one point, one of my best sources who tests meat for E. coli for the meat industry said, Michael, as tragic as these incidents of contamination are, you really should look at some of the things my industry, he was talking about the processed meat industry, is intentionally adding to its products, over which it has like total control. He was worried about all the salt going into processed meats, but that got me started looking at sugar and oils and fat as this unholy trinity, if you will, in which the industry is so reliant. And I was meeting with Andy and I was kind of telling him, I'm poking around in salt and some fat things and looking at sugar. And he goes, salt, sugar, fat. That's a great book title, right? And in fact, we kind of laughed later because as the narration of the book kind of played out, I switched it up and I start with sugar because I'm sort of drawing a timeline. And so kids are so drawn to sugar. And I was starting out, with us at an early age and then ending with salt, which is more sort of a health problem for older people. But I'll show you the cover of Salt, Sugar, Fat because I still laugh when I see this. So the artist, having read the manuscript, went into his grocery store and pulled out his favorite, highly processed foods, brought them home and ripped out the lettering. And you can kind of still see the rip marks that he did there, and rearranged the lettering to reflect kind of what's really going on in these products, which of course is kind of what the Salt, Sugar, Fat was all about. So, reporters love photographers. We love artists because they're able to capture, the proverbial, an image tells 1,000 words, and look at the world kind of in this just ultra crystal clear way that even sort of helps us as reporters clarify what we're trying to do kind of with all of those words. So I love both covers of the book kind of for that reason, is that an artist has spent that time trying to encapsulate, the 140 or 180,000 words in the book, or at least tease out a really critical aspect of it.
One of the things we've learned in the last decade or so is how the food industry deliberately or the sugar lobby went after, or was it, sorry, can you explain what happened with the Harvard study? And
I thought that was, sorry, go ahead.
There was a choice between making fat the villain and sugar the villain, and people and the industry paid scientists at Harvard Medical School to put their thumb on the scale and essentially mislead the American public. And then we've been stuck with that legacy. That's my shorthand. Please clarify.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good. I mean, there were a couple kind of things in that, which is, over the years, we've tended to become concerned about one aspect of processed food over others. And so, you can look at some years when we're more concerned about sugar, or more concerned about oils, or more concerned about salt. And in a way that kind of plays right into these companies because they're really good at adjusting their formulas to respond to our concern. And so if we're in a decade where we're worried about sugar, they'll bring the sugar levels down a little bit, but then they'll increase the fats and the salt, because the bottom line is they're making these products with maximum allure. And they know that sort of adding more of those other things will keep us coming back and wanting more of their products. So that's kind of the first thought. The other thing is that there was a real window on the control that in the influence that the industry has in science. And one of the most gripping examples of that, even if it's indirect, is that the obesity rate in this country began climbing in 1980 to where we passed 42% of clinical obesity among American adults, even before the pandemic. I mean, that is approaching 1 in 2 adults. But it wasn't until the year 2019 that a very sort of clever, brilliant scientist at the NIH did the very first gold standard trial, where he was able to show causation, not just linkage between ultra-processed foods, but he took two groups of people, put them in the eating lab for 2 weeks, fed them very different diets, and the group on eating what we call these ultra-processed foods was the group that gained weight. And it was just kind of staggering to me that it took 40 years for government, which in many ways is less powerful than these food companies, to sort of catch up and do the fundamental science that would really enable us to make better decisions about what we eat and how much.
Was there a moment where things could have gone in the other direction?
Well, yeah. I mean, I opened Salt, Sugar, Fat with this rather secret meeting, the heads of the largest companies getting together in Minneapolis in 1999 to discuss none other than their culpability in our overdependence on their products, the rising obesity rate, type 2 diabetes, gout. There were cabals of insiders in these companies that were becoming alarmed about their responsibility for our growing health trouble for these products. And they were urging the companies to kind of collectively do something to sort of lessen their own dependence on using gobs of salt, sugar, fat, additives, and other aspects of their foods to get us hooked on their products. And of course, you know, the pushback was incredible. Bottom line is the heads of the companies basically said, okay, you know, fine, but you've got to remember, we're companies, not philanthropies, and there is no way we're going to mess around with the company jewels, referring to things like salt, sugar, fat, if that's going to mean, you know, diminished sales in the grocery store. So that was an incredible lost moment. And
it wasn't in, say, like tobacco in the 1959. You're saying it was in 1999.
And for a journalist, and so it again, sort of for a journalist, for those of you out there who aren't journalists or reporters, that is just such a powerful, rich moment, because it tells you that people inside the industry that you're reporting on have knowledge. They know what's going on. And that becomes just so much more powerful than having outsiders criticize them. And more, you know, hats off to consumer markets for you know, helping to sort of hold their feet to the fire. But knowing that they, even way back then, is an incredibly powerful moment for a journalist in terms of telling that story and sort of putting blame and accountability where it justly should reside.
Yeah. All right, folks, we have about 25 minutes left with Michael Moss. He's the author of the brand new book, Hooked, and the best-selling author of Sugar, Salt, Fat. Salt, Sugar, Fat. Yeah. Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, you just came on. I'm losing you in my earpiece, so I'm going to switch earpieces and see if that works.
Okay, but you can hear me a little bit at least?
I can hear you right now, yes, but okay. I couldn't hear you before.
All right. Well, folks, thank you so much for joining us. Please tag a friend who would benefit from learning what Michael's sharing with us, and also from reading the newspaper. We do this every Sunday at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time. And of course, it's recorded and available immediately on Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, and on Facebook. So tag a friend and they can watch live or they can watch later. And Michael is going to do a little demo for us and talk from behind his kitchen counter. So he'll head there now, and that'll give us a chance to have a little interactive portion of our show. And as we said, we do this every Sunday. We're always looking for great guests like Michael. So if you have suggestions of folks who should be on with us, just anyone who would enjoy reading the paper and talking about their work and career, would love to have them. So now let me bring Michael back on, and let's see where he is right now.
Great. And if I lose the earpiece again, we're going to solve that technology by... I'll take the microphone off and talk directly to the laptop. So I apologize. These are my 17-year-old's AirPods, and he swore they were charged enough to make it to the show. So we'll bring him on the set to have a little conversation about that technology. So one of the things that happened after Salt, Sugar, Fat is that the very first question I got from a reporter, I think it was a British tabloid reporter in London, was, "Okay, Michael, you end Salt, Sugar, Fat on this hopeful note, saying, look, knowledge is power, and ultimately, knowing what the food companies are up to can help us decide what to eat and how much. But isn't this stuff you're writing about addictive as drugs? And if that's the case, like, where's our opportunity for making decisions or having any willpower or say in the matter?" And I kind of like backpedal, because I was avoiding using the A word, addiction, and Salt, Sugar, Fat as much as I can, because it just seemed a little ridiculous to me to compare Twinkies or Oreo cookies with heroin. I mean, where's the harsh chemicals in these food products? Where's the, and why do only some people lose control and not everybody? And whoever heard of an armed robbery of a convenience store to, grab a bunch of these things like you might have, a drugstore of a junkie? But 5 years later, Sri, I have to tell you, I've completely come full circle, having spent time with drug addiction experts who are now studying food addiction, having crawled back into the underbelly of this trillion-dollar industry to meet and spend time with their chemists and their marketing people as they're spending all of their waking hours getting us to just not just want their products, but to want more and more of them. And realizing that in many ways, these products can be even more kind of problematic, because, not just the salt, sugar, fat, but they're tapping into our basic biology that by nature draws us toward food, even compels us to overeat, because for most of our existence, overeating was a really good thing to do. It meant life or death. It meant putting on some amount of body fat, which meant our brains could grow and we could get through hard times and we could have more babies, right? A critical thing for natural selection. But what happened is, in the last 50 years, is the food companies changed the nature of their food so dramatically that we haven't been able to sort of catch up to it genetically, and there's this huge kind of mismatch. So one of the things we're drawn to by food is cheapness, right? Back in the hunter-gatherer days, cheapness meant less energy expenditure, which we were all about. It made much more sense that instead of running down an antelope for dinner, we would just reach down and grab that aardvark sitting there, right? And so what do the companies do? They have chemical laboratories working for them. There's a number of these in New Jersey called flavor houses. And they mix and match chemicals to kind of imitate some of the natural flavors out there in real kind of wholesome foods. We've all heard about pumpkin pie spice. I did a piece for the New York Times. You can still find the video on it, on how the flavor houses use as many as 80 ingredients to find like the perfect pumpkin pie spice thing to go into all kinds of products in the grocery store. Starbucks started that trend with pumpkin pie spice in coffee, and it's like spread around the grocery store. But what I didn't know until I spent time with them for Hooked is that their overall mission in working for processed food companies is to reduce the cost of products, reformulate the ingredients, again, knowing that if they can knock 10 cents off the price of a toaster pastry box, we're going to get really excited about that. And so now you're seeing these big discount stores that are even selling groceries at lower costs than Walmart, with luxury cars in the parking lots, because everybody gets excited about food. And I don't mean to make light of the many, many people out there who are having to buy inexpensive food because that is all that they can afford. But it's an even sort of bigger phenomenon than that. We by nature love variability. It's why we were able to spread around the globe, respond to earlier shifts in climate when our food sources shifted dramatically, and even moved to places in the Arctic where we could get excited about things like whale blubber. And so what do the companies do? they have maximized the variety of their products in the grocery store. So you walk into the cereal aisle, for example, there are 200 versions of sugary starch just waiting there, knowing that that will get our brain excited. And maybe the most critical aspect of our natural draw toward food is our affinity for calories. I have to reach behind me for a couple of props. We, by nature, love food that has calories because it just kind of makes sense that the more calories, the more energy, the more fuel for our bodies. Calories used to be a rare thing in nature, so when you got something with lots of calories, you wanted to be sure that your brain would get excited by that and would tell you, let's eat more of that. And so it turns out we have sensors in the gut and possibly even in the mouth that tell us how many calories are coming into a product. And we get more and more excited by there being more and more calories, or by foods that have more and more calories in them. And they did this really clever experiment using a type of sugar called maltodextrin, which most people can't taste. And so you can have 2 glasses of water, one plain water, and the other with maltodextrin in it. The taste, feels, looks the same as the plain water, but it will have 100 or 150 calories in it. And when they test people, they will almost invariably choose the maltodextrin flavored water more than the other because of this kind of innate affinity with calories. And so, sorry, I lost my lighter, so I'm doing a match here. And so what have the food companies done? They have maximized the number of calories in their products, knowing that we will get excited. And typically what they do to do that, especially in snack foods, is to add lots and lots of oils and fats. Because fats can have, or do have rather, twice as many calories as say sugar. And so the typical formula for snack products is to have 50% of the calories coming from the fat and the oil in the products, which has, this alternative benefit. If you're somebody out camping in the woods and you don't have any kindling, but you've got like a bag of snack chips or Fritos in this case, these make terrific kindling because they light up and burn so fast. And so I'm illustrating to you how much fuel there is in these snack products. And I came across that because in my spare time, I like to do things like climb mountains. And the problem you have there is the opposite, which is we can't get enough food into our bodies. We lose weight. And so one little trick that mountain climbers use is to take like a bag of Fritos, smash it to smithereens, and then sprinkle that on like all the food you're eating to get more calories. Because in this tiny little bag, there are 1,440 calories, almost as much as what many people should be eating in a whole day. And you have these snack products all over the grocery store. And so you can kind of see the result of the oil and the calories, or rather the industry knowing that we're drawn to calories and making their products so seductive to us by adding these. And now I'm going to do this. It's an oil fire, so I'm not going to bother to turn on the water. And that's kind of the Cliff Notes version of the much longer talk I give to people, sort of explaining to them the power of their products. And I'm coming back to you now. and kind of the incredible science that goes into the making of these products and maximizing the allure of them.
Our speakers are often on fire when they speak to us and share their stories. The first time we've had a speaker light a fire like that. So for those who missed it or just saw the flames, tell us what exactly you did and what were you showing us at that moment?
So I opened up a bag of kind of typical snack food that, by the way, now on average per person is contributing something in the order of 550 calories a day. Snacking has become the fourth American meal, partly because of our turning to the processed food industry for convenience and falling so hard for the convenience of their foods. So I opened up a very typical bag of snacks. In this case, it was Fritos, poured it on the rack, took a match, held it to the Fritos, I think it was about 20 seconds. And that's all it took to ignite one Frito and then the same thing as a way of illustrating what calories are. They're fuel for our bodies. And there's nothing wrong with having a handful of Fritos, or if you're a mountain climber expending 5,000 or 6,000 calories a day, eating a whole bag of Fritos. But if you're home, not paying attention to what you're eating, not having a huge expenditure of energy, that bag of Fritos becomes problematic because so many of us can't resist eating more than a handful.
And Patricia asks about moderation. And, you said that mountain climbers could eat some of that. But what do you suggest for everyday folks who are not climbing mountains?
Yeah, so one of the things in Hook 2 that I look at is are there lessons we can draw from other addictions, whether it's cigarettes, alcohol, and harsher drugs. And of course, it kind of depends kind of where you are on the spectrum, because addiction and overdependence and a bad kind of repetitive habit happens on a spectrum. Some of us are more vulnerable than others. And if you're somebody who gets tripped up by sugar, for example, and I've met people, I've gone to meetings of groups that are patterned after Alcoholics Anonymous, except they will stand up and say, hi, I'm so-and-so, I'm a food addict. I cannot touch a grain of sugar or refined starch without losing control. For them, the only strategy is what drug addicts will use, which is abstention, complete abstention. And it's really hard because, as we mentioned, walking to the grocery store, some 2/3 of the products now have added sugars. So for them, practicing abstention arguably is even harder for a heroin addict to sort of avoid heroin, because these food products and the triggers for them is all over the place. If you're kind of more in the middle of the spectrum and your trouble with food maybe is like that 3 p.m. craving for cookies, and that's kind of the main event of the day. One of the lessons from the world of addiction is that craving happens so fast and so strong that it robs you of free will, of the willpower to do anything about it. And so no matter what your strategy is, whether it's getting up and stretching, calling a friend, having something else maybe that's healthier like a handful of nuts, you pretty much need to be executing that strategy at 2:55 in order to ward off the 3 p.m. craving, right? And then for the rest of us who are kind of way down on the spectrum, and maybe our trouble with food is just kind of the loss of the love and the ritual for home meals with friends, family, where we linger and talk and relish that. Probably the strategy there is just find some ways that you can start cooking again and kind of take back from the industry what it stole from us, because even convenience is something that you could do for yourself. I have a spaghetti sauce recipe now that takes 93 seconds. There's no excuse to buy like the salty, sugary versions of spaghetti sauce you can find on the shelf. And granted, if it simmers a bit, my family's more apt to kind of eat that spaghetti sauce. But the actual work going into it, and so I think one of the myths and one of the lies perpetrated by the processed food industry is that we need them for convenience. I think in many ways we don't, and that's something we can take back for ourselves.
Thank you. I hope you'll post the 93-second sauce recipe on Twitter.
I would, except the New York Times cooking crew is so masterful at what they do. And it is so hard to demonstrate cooking that I refer everybody to them and their demos on not only elaborate dinners, but fast cooking. And Melissa Clark is a neighbor of mine, and she's brilliant at demonstrating the full range of cooking from spending lots of time to very little time.
She's awesome, and I've been reading her for so long, and that whole cooking section is incredible. Ron
Yes.
Thomas says, "What a great demo! Wow, never again." So not only are we selling books here, but we're also helping people become more healthy. Laura says, "What a vivid way to tell the story." For those of you who missed it, he lit a bag, the inside contents of a bag of Fritos on fire, and to show us what are some of the content of this kind of food. And Rose says, Fritos fuel for our bodies, bag at 1,400 calories, 1,450. We have a tendency for high glucose or insulin. It's dangerous. And Jonathan says, for me, the biggest issue is that small size packages, regardless of additives, are almost impossible to get. I live alone. I don't need something that serves 4. And while I'm at it, a cup of coffee is closer to 6 ounces, not 12. And here, people are talking about your sauce recipe, or at least demanding it. And Patricia says, thanks, Michael and the entire production team. And I'm flying solo today because Neil's out, but we're with Paula Kiger, and our entire team make this show possible. We just have a few minutes left. And Michael, I just wanted to ask you, what are some things that parents who are watching, who have young kids, can keep in mind as they try to raise healthy eaters?
Oh, yeah. So my boys are old now. My son's about to graduate, oldest about to graduate from college, and my 17-year-old I mentioned is taking the SAT prep on his way to finding a college. When they were younger, one of the tricks that my wife came up with was to say that in order to get them to eat more of that stuff every nutritionist says we should be eating more of, broccoli, that we would have to sort of tease them into trying broccoli 19 times. We kind of pulled that number out of the air, but it really does kind of reflect back on this notion that through habit, which can be bad habits dictated by the companies or good habits developed by ourselves, we can change our relationship to food and what we like. And one of my favorite scientists said to me at some point, Michael, we like what we eat more than we eat what we like, meaning that if you can spend enough time changing your habits and focusing on eating good foods, your brain will come around and start getting excited about, whole vegetables and whole fruits and a home-cooked meal scratched as it will for, Doritos and Cheetos and Fritos and Hot Pockets and Lunchables and so much of that processed food in the store. But it takes time, because so many of us have had a lifetime of sort of developing bad habits brought by the food industry that we can't expect to change our memory channels and our habits to the good side in just a matter of days or weeks. It can take months, and so it takes patience. And one of the best pieces of advice I've heard for people, if you're trying to lose weight, if you're trying to shape new eating habits into your kids, don't try to do too much at once. Maybe just pick one thing to work on for a while, because you don't want to fail and feel bad about that. Trying too much is hard to stick with over time.
Thank you. And here's a piece about drinking patterns, especially among women, have changed because of the pandemic. Have you done research or written about drinking and how that's connected to food?
Well, I haven't, except looking generally about other addictive substances, like cigarettes and alcohol and drugs. So kind of in that context, which, by the way, one of the surprising things to me was how many people can actually smoke, drink, and even use harsher drugs like heroin. And mind you, I'm not suggesting anybody do this, because the contamination problem alone in narcotics is incredibly, makes it incredibly risky. But they're able to do so, occasionally, casually. And I think, again, that reflects back on food and answers that question: why do only some of us fall so hard for these food products, and why are we in particular kind of vulnerable, which I'll try to answer in the book.
This is, speaking of New York Times Cooking, this is their first book from this brand. Of course, the Times has had food books for decades, but this is about not needing recipes to do.
I saw that from Sam Sifton. Yeah, I'm so excited to read that book because, I think one of the biggest challenges for me in the pandemic, my wife works for a big hospital system and she has been working like crazy since day one of the pandemic. Much of the cooking and sort of the food stuff has fallen on me. But one of the hardest things is kind of like week after week after week coming up with kind of interesting products and also being able to sort of plan the week's eating ahead of time. And I think that's one thing that we've lost over the years because we turned over planning to the processed food industry. So I love efforts like Sam Sifton's. It's going to help us sort of rethink our relationship to cooking and food in a way that maybe doesn't require so much planning and effort on our part. And we can just, spontaneously grab stuff out of our own cupboards and make a fabulous dinner. So I can't thank him enough for writing that book.
And here is the foods section of the Times Magazine. It turns out a letter of recommendation, filet of fish. Its appeal is inscrutable, perhaps out of proportion to its paltry constituent parts. So this is praising McDonald's filet of fish.
Well, that's so interesting because I saw an advertisement from McDonald's yesterday bragging on their McMuffin breakfast thing, and they were like saying, okay, you can go out and buy an egg and a muffin and the, other ingredients and make it yourself, but there's no way it's going to taste as great as our McMuffin. And I thought that was like so cunning because it kind of does get to this memory thing. If you grew up on McMuffins, that's lodged in your brain, and you may well think, wrongly, I think, that the real thing isn't going to taste as good as their version. I've lost my earpiece. I'm going to reach for it.
And this is Tejal Rao's recipe here for chile rellenos, roasted, filled, and queso fresco, fried in an egg batter and simmered in salsa, are worth the effort. And this is about Liz Cheney and the Republicans going after each other. And of course, she's the number 3 person in Congress. And here's something about Seth Rogen and his fountain of youth. Though, Michael, I gotta say, when you told me your age, I want to ask you for your tips on staying healthy and staying young.
I get a little exercise, not to like burn junk food calories, but it does kind of change the way you look at food as fuel and strength for your body and your mind. I spend a little time smelling flowers, gardening, because that makes me happy. And I think that sort of a happiness is fantastic. I spend not enough time working on, the relationship with my spouse, which I think is really critical to happiness and health. And then another part, now that I'm 65, is sort of spending time, trying to find ways to kind of give back to the world. I remember when the pandemic hit, we made sandwiches for the local food bank every day for 3 months, I think, and I engaged my kids in there. So kind of, I think, a combination of the things. But different stuff works for different folks, and I by no means would want to preach my method to anybody.
Well, you certainly have the hair down, unlike us, who might be younger than you but have already lost our hair.
Every time I go on CBS this morning, Gayle King talks about my hair, and you have just done that also. That's very funny. But I haven't had a haircut since the pandemic. This is a selfie haircut with scissors from a crayon box because it was like the sharpest hair I could find in my house. So the extent to which it looks totally wacko is all on me.
Well, there's this immense hair envy going on right now. My mom is watching from Kerala in India. Hi, Amma, love you. Thank you for watching and for all your support. Carla is asking, will you be writing more books on the subject of food?
I don't know. I've done 2 now where I put every ounce of effort and blood into them. Maybe there's a third. I'm certainly open to suggestions. Send me an email. You guys know my website. My email address is on there too.
Mossbooks.us.
Yes,
Mossbooks.us. Everyone check it out.
I'm welcome. And I welcome any ideas that you have.
Thank you. Emily says, would you share 1 or 2 advocacy points? The food lobby has lots of dollars. A couple of ways, I guess, we could all be advocates and fight the food giants.
There are so many things. I mean, I kind of wish, I dream of sort of, having one zip code in the city or the country where you could change like 10 different things, because obesity is so complex. And we've allowed sort of our value system to be changed and dictated by these companies for so long that I really think you need to change. And one of, I think, the most opportune things is putting a garden in elementary schools to get kids excited about things like radishes would be step 1, right? But then you have to figure out, when they bring that radish home to their parents, are their parents going to be able to buy that radish at even find it in a food desert and then afford it, as we mentioned before, compared to that 2-pound frozen pizza. And so on and on and on with the entire agriculture system, because the last time I looked, 90% of the acreage in this country, farmers were growing field corn, not the kind of corn you eat off the cob, and soybeans, key ingredients in processed food, and spending lots of effort reducing the price of those ingredients. And the rest of the 10% was like for all vegetables and fruits and nuts and all that stuff we should be eating more of. So the whole food system needs to be turned around, I would argue, and change to what nutritionists tell us we should be doing, which is filling up half of our plate with fruits and vegetables.
I've been following the food industry for many years, but I didn't realize there are 2 kinds of corn. I thought all the corn we hear over planting of corn, I thought it was corn on the cob type corn.
Yeah, not at all. This is field corn. The kernels are like really big, and they're used for not only sort of, corn as ingredient in foods, but for high fructose corn syrup, for animal feed, and then for the ethanol as well. So those are sort of the 3 destinations of field corn. But no, you can't like grab that stuff and throw it in a pot of water and eat it. It's very starchy.
I had no idea, so I'm going to research that for sure. What we're going to do is I'm going to do a couple of quick announcements and then come back to Michael to give us another synopsis of the new book. Everyone knows his first book, Salt, Sugar, Fat, but we're talking about hooks. So we're going to come back to you in just a minute, Michael. And I want to thank everybody who's been watching us today. Our conversation's been with Michael Moss. Please follow him at Michael Moss C. And big thanks to our team of producers, Neil Parekh, Julia Weeks, Carla Baranauckas, Steve Taylor, and Paula Kiger doing extra work today. Thank you very much. And reminder to everyone that my flagship conference, it's completely online, May 21st, Friday night, and Saturday morning, May 22nd, social media weekend, we call it. Lots of tips, tricks, and learnings about all aspects of digital and social media. Please tell your friends. We want to thank also Carla for putting out every week the Local Connection. Subscribe for weekly story ideas and pro tips for local reporters. The bit.ly link is bit.ly/local news tips. I recommend this to every journalist everywhere. Can learn how to take big national, international stories and how to localize it. So important. And we want to tell everybody that at 11 o'clock Eastern, Dr. Sujana Chandrasekhar and Dr. Marina Korean will be here with a special episode of She's on Call, live on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. They have 2 stars from Netflix's show, Lennox Hill. 2 neurosurgeons are going to be with us and talking. So please join us at 11 a.m. Eastern time. And now we're going back to Michael to get a reminder of why everyone should read and get hooked, his new book. All right, Michael, over to you.
Well, if you like a good detective story, you like a strong narrative, you love reading about cartels, industry that shapes our lives in secretive and troubling ways. I put everything into hooks. So I appreciate all the readers who have read it. It landed on the New York Times bestseller list for 1 week, but that was fantastic. Salt, Sugar, Fat, the predecessor, was a #1 New York Times best-selling book for all nonfiction books, which was fantastic. And so I just really appreciate your time and doing this show, doing the work that you do, bringing New York Times journalism alive and journalism generally. So thank you so much, Shri.
Thanks very much, Michael, and thank you everybody for watching. And I was saying to Michael, good luck to you with the promotion of the book, and to your 17-year-old as he gets ready for the SATs. And Ron says there's an education each week, and Jonathan says, great show, lots of food for thought. There you go. Jonathan's a comedian as well. Thank you very much, everyone, for watching, and we'll see you soon. Everyone, check out the book.